Last winter, my relationship with my boyfriend, let's call him Jason, began to unravel. Work pressure, financial strain, and the heavy gloom of the season made our tiny apartment feel suffocating. Jason started working late nights after a senior colleague left, and I began to feel invisible, like an object he moved around rather than a person he came home to. One Friday evening, after he canceled our date night to finish another report, I called my best friend Claire and insisted we needed a girls' night, one with loud music and enough vodka to forget the icy streets outside. Around midnight, my phone battery died. That detail became important later, but in that moment, it freed me from checking for Jason's messages. A group of guys eventually approached us with shots. One of them, tall, freckles, charming, pulled me onto the dance floor. He moved closer, and I let him. I remember thinking, I could leave, or I could lean into this feeling of being wanted again. I chose the latter. We ended up at his place. The next morning, shame overwhelmed me as I vomited into his bathroom sink. I lied to Claire later, telling her I slept on her couch because I'd lost my keys. She gave me a skeptical look, but didn't press. For 2 weeks, I carried that betrayal like smoldering coal in my pocket, burning me while I pretended everything was fine. Jason noticed. He asked why I recoiled at his touch, why I stared blankly after intimacy instead of curling into him. Eventually, the truth spilled out one Sunday. His face collapsed in a way I didn't know was possible, and I realized I had destroyed something precious. After that, he drove us home in silence and said he needed time. For a week, I slept on the couch while we scheduled therapy sessions, doctor appointments, and STD tests. His calmness gave me false hope that we could repair what I'd broken. I clung to that hope desperately, changing everything, deleting men from my contacts, quitting alcohol, starting therapy. But beneath the surface, I was still terrified of being alone. Then came my second mistake. My office relocated next to an upscale gym. Joining felt like a fresh start. Clean living, sobriety, focus. On my first day, attention found me again. Among the regulars was Drew. Smooth, fit, funny. We exchanged casual jokes that quickly escalated to flirty DMs. Before long, our messages turned sexual. I tried convincing myself it was harmless, just validation. But I knew better. The line was crossed when I met him after workout, and in a dimly lit corner, things got physical. I told myself it wasn't full-blown cheating, but it was. Then came Valentine's Day. Jason surprised me with dinner and a handwritten note about rebuilding trust. As he read his letter aloud, my phone buzzed nonstop, Drew's name lighting up the screen inside my purse. That night, the guilt broke me completely. I confessed everything, the explicit messages, the physical betrayal at the gym, all of it. This time, Jason didn't suggest therapy. The following morning, he booked an Airbnb for a month and informed me that he would collect his belongings after our lease ended. The next few weeks were a blur of regret and disconnection. Claire called my behavior self-destructive. My therapist helped me trace the roots, how I'd long mistaken attention for love, praise for self-worth. I wanted to chase Jason, to prove my remorse. But another part of me wanted to drown in Drew's attention, to numb the shame. In the end, I did neither. I simply froze. Jason eventually stopped responding, except for practical matters. When he came to retrieve his belongings, he barely looked at me. Even then, I still held on to a shred of hope. But 2 months later, I finally understood there was none left. I had betrayed him twice, not out of malice, but out of my own brokenness, my need for constant reassurance. I'm no longer asking how to win him back. I forfeited that right. Instead, I'm trying to understand what in me allowed this pattern to repeat, this hunger for validation that leads me into these self-destructive loops. An update. When the lease expired, Jason transferred to me, moved into a small studio near his office, and mailed me a box of our shared memories, photos, letters, but no note. That simple act of letting go hurt more than any fight could have. Drew messaged me a few times after seeing my breakup post. I hovered over the reply button longer than I should have, feeling that familiar pull, but I didn't respond. Instead, I placed my phone face down and breathed deeply for a full minute. It felt like lifting a tiny weight after major surgery. Insignificant on the outside, monumental on the inside. Therapy has shifted from crisis management to addressing my lifelong dependency on external affirmation. My therapist helped me map out patterns tracing back to childhood. A frequently absent father, a mother stretched thin working multiple jobs, and a teenage version of myself who discovered that flirtation earned her both grades and attention. Validation became transactional long before I learned what real connection looked like. Understanding this doesn't excuse my actions, but it gives me a starting point. A few weeks ago, Claire and I met for brunch. She told me she'd always admired my spontaneity. I laughed and cried, realizing that what friends saw as adventurous was often just me fleeing from stillness, from ordinariness. I admitted to her that my so-called fearlessness was actually fear on overdrive, the fear being still of not being special. She squeezed my hand and simply said, "Maybe being boring will save your life for a while." She's right. These days, I intentionally lead a quiet life. Work, therapy, evening walks without music, journaling my raw, unfiltered thoughts. When the urge to download dating apps arises, I treat it like a nicotine craving. Acknowledge, breathe, let it pass. Most cravings fade after about 8 minutes. I time them. I won't sugarcoat it. Some mornings, the weight of what I've lost feels so heavy that I physically have to roll myself out of bed. Other days, I hear that tempting voice. You're young, attractive. Why deny yourself? But I answer that voice with the truth. I need to learn how to generate my own light before I plug into someone else's again. Jason's final email came through our landlord. He allowed me to keep the security deposit. That small act of kindness, not anger, but indifference, stung more than any argument ever could. It meant he had truly moved on. I wrote him a long apology, read it aloud to my therapist, and ultimately chose not to send it. He knows I'm sorry. Sending more words would serve me, not him. Instead, I donated the deposit amount to a local domestic violence shelter in both our names, not as penance, but as a first step toward becoming someone whose actions match their values. And so here I am, alone, sober, scared, but cautiously hopeful. The root of my failures was my inability to tolerate the discomfort of feeling unseen. Now, my work is to face that discomfort, build my self-worth, and never again offer love with one hand while hiding crossed fingers behind my back. In my last therapy session, I told my counselor that I finally understood why Jason refused to reconcile. For him to take me back, he would have had to deny the painful reality I forced him to face. Twice. Instead, he honored that reality. In its own way, that's the most loving boundary anyone has ever set for me. My responsibility now is to honor it too, and to change, whether anyone's watching or not. If I ever share my story again, I hope it's to measure my progress not in months since the betrayal, but in days I've lived with honesty, stability, and integrity. For anyone else trapped in their own spiral, know this: the ground beneath you doesn't appear all at once. It forms inch by inch, only if you stay still long enough to feel it rise beneath your feet. I've lived in both the free fall and the standstill. As unsteady as it feels, standing still is better.